Cruise haters, what's your problem? As a cruise enthusiast, I obviously don't get you, but I do want to try to understand you. Hi, I'm Melissa, a university professor who loves to cruise and who loves to talk ship. And in this episode of the Cruise Pod, I want to dive into those cruise haters and acknowledge some of the ugly truths about cruising and really try to understand why some people just don't like cruising. I don't get it, but I want to understand why some people don't like it. We'll explore common criticisms and talk about some counterpoints to offer some balanced perspectives. So let's set sail on this discussion. One reason some people don't like cruises is kind of gross and ageist, is this perception that cruises are just for old people. This is a prevalent stereotype. I hear it all the time when I'm talking to people not on a cruise about how much I love cruising. I hear it of, oh, I would go on a cruise, but that's like for grandparents, right? And yes, historically, this may have had some truth, but recent data indicate a demographic shift. In fact, I just did an interview with Bloomberg, I'll drop that link below if you're interested in the business side of cruising, about how these demographics are shifting. But according to the Cruise Lines International Association, which is CLIA, the average age of cruise passengers has decreased to 46 years. That's a young spring chicken, come on. And 36% of cruisers are now under 40. So yeah, if you're a teenager or in your early 20s, that might still feel old, but it's definitely younger than it used to be. And the reason for these shifts in demographics are largely due to some shifts in how the cruise lines are approaching cruising. Most of the cruise lines have started to really be mindful of introducing activities and amenities that appeal to younger travelers or travelers with young families as a target demographic. They're really starting to emphasize adventure excursions, nightlife, be it in the club, wellness programs. So yeah, cruises, they're always going to attract older adults. And for older adults, it's a really great way to see the world. You don't have to hop in a plane and bop around to see different countries. You don't have to spend days on days on days traveling. You can relax, go to bed at night, wake up, and oh my gosh, you're in a whole new country. So yes, it is going to be a great option always for older adults, but it's a whole boatload of fun for people of all ages as well. And people are starting to see that. It is starting to become a popular choice for those younger generations that are seeking out diverse experiences, that want to see the world in an affordable way, that don't want the stress of traveling in the traditional way. I did a little European backpacking experience a couple of years ago where I visited 7 European countries in 8 days. And let me tell you, it kind of wore me out. And I'm a younger person compared to cruise demographics. And it's exhausting taking all these different flights, doing miles and miles and miles and miles of walking every single day. It does get exhausting, and sometimes people have physical limitations. So cruising is a really great option for a very diverse audience. Another reason some people hate cruises is their floating petri dishes. So fun fact, I actually had put together my talking points for this video, and I posted a TikTok about cruise ship pools. And right before I came in to film this video, I had not one but 2 comments about, ew, cruise ships in general are just gross floating petri dishes. Who cares about the pool? And I'm thinking to myself, I can't believe I forgot to put this as one of my talking points of why people hate cruises. And yes, there is this widespread perception that cruises are petri dishes, meaning that there's a lot of people crammed together, not always exercising the best hygiene, which there's some truth to that. And as a result, illness can run rampant. Also because of the way the staterooms are kind of interconnected with the ventilation, that if you have an outbreak of some kind of gastrointestinal issue that is spread by people not washing their hands and they're in the cruise ship buffets and it can spread, there is some truth to that. But the number of times I've gotten sick on a cruise, and I cruise monthly, is 0. Knock on wood. Never gotten sick from a cruise. Now, there are some best practices that you can follow. Bring your Clorox wipes, wipe down the remote control. I wipe down the vents in the room right when I get in there. But the big one, wash your hands, you nasty people. It shocks me on a cruise that people don't make use of the hand washing stations. I'm a little bit of a germaphobe, so I'm the one that's always there washing my hands diligently, using the hand sanitizer station, which by the way, Carnival recently phased out. What the heck, Carnival, ew. But follow good hygiene and you're less likely to catch something or get sick on a cruise. But do I agree with the statement that cruises are petri dishes? No. If you practice good hygiene, and in my case, I kind of generally try to avoid the buffet, it's not like going on a cruise is some guarantee that you're gonna get sick. Another reason some people hate cruising is because of the environmental impact. Now, this one's a little hard to provide a counterpoint for because it is kind of true. It is undeniable that cruising has some pretty major environmental implications. Cruise ships contribute to carbon emissions, waste generation, and potential harm to marine ecosystems. So for example, large cruise ships, they can emit significant amounts of sulfur oxides that contribute to air pollution. But my response to that is, tell me one type of travel that does not have environmental impact. Yeah, there are sustainable travel practices, but 99% of travelers don't follow that. And flying on an airplane could be just as environmentally detrimental. And while I do acknowledge cruise lines are not environmentally friendly at all, the industry is making some strides towards sustainability. They're investing in clean technologies like liquefied natural gas propulsion, advanced wastewater treatment, and stuff like that. So they are putting forth an effort to be more environmentally friendly, but real facts, cruising, it has environmental impact, and that's a fact. And if you cruise, you do have to live with that. So my response to that is, yeah, you're right. And if you hate cruising for that reason, I'm not gonna try to argue with you. Another reason some people don't like cruising is because they don't wanna feel like they're stuck on a ship. They don't wanna feel confined. And I get that if you have claustrophobic tendencies especially, but there are some things you can do to mitigate this. So if you tend to feel claustrophobic, look at those itineraries that have lots of port stops and minimal sea days. So that allows you to maximize your feet on ground time with frequent onshore exploration. Modern cruise ships too, trust me, you're not gonna feel shut in. These are massive modern marvels of engineering. They offer so many spaces and space, so many activities. For example, just look at Royal Caribbean's Icon of the Seas. This is one of the largest cruise ships ever built. There are tons of multi-level open spaces, so you don't ever have to feel confined. So choosing a ship like that with ample public areas, large open spaces, and lots of things to do, like diverse entertainment options, can help alleviate those feelings of confinement and being stuck on a cruise ship and getting bored too. Now, additionally, if you do tend to feel claustrophobic, you don't like to feel stuck, opting for a cabin that offers a balcony or an ocean view can provide a much greater sense of openness and connection to the sea versus an interior room, which is going to be cheaper, but you are going to feel a little closed in. Another reason people hate cruising sometimes is because of seasickness. Either they've taken a cruise and gotten seasick, or they are worried about getting seasick. Now, motion sickness, it is a valid concern because it can be really unpleasant. Seasickness symptoms can range from mild discomfort to severe nausea. I actually have a friend who took one cruise way before I started cruising, and he actually kind of dissuaded me from cruising for a long time because he had such a terrible time with seasickness and mal de débarquement. It's a fancy French phrase I probably just butchered, but MDD, or sea legs, is when you get off a ship and you feel really wonky and disoriented and you kind of feel like you're swaying. And sometimes, especially for newbie cruisers, that can persist for a while. But he had both issues on his cruise, and as a result, he hated it. He claimed that he felt the MDD for like weeks, if not months after his cruise, and he had nothing good to say about it. So he never is going to step foot on a cruise ship again. But scenarios like that are rare, where you have extreme seasickness or motion sickness, or you have that extreme MDD syndrome after a cruise. And there are some things that you can do to be proactive in combating these things. At least with motion sickness, you can take over-the-counter medications like Dramamine, and there also are those scopolamine patches. So if you're on a cruise and you see people with the little patches behind their ear, that is generally what they're doing, is they're trying to stave off motion sickness. And it's actually recommended that if you use the patches, you put it on before you get on the cruise ship so you don't let severe nausea build up. Now, a word of caution. This is something that is uncommon, but I have to mention it because it does affect me. I've tried Dramamine and scopolamine patches, and I had really bad reactions to both. On one cruise, I had seasickness. A friend of mine gave me some Dramamine, and it knocked me out. And I basically spent the whole cruise asleep. So if you do the Dramamine, make sure you've tried it before and get maybe the non-drowsy version, because I pretty much wasted that whole cruise asleep. And with the scopolamine patches, I had some pretty gnarly side effects. So Google that and research that before you take it. Maybe try it at home before you take it on a cruise with you and wear it. And whatever you do, be very careful not to put a patch on and then touch your eye or put or take out contacts, because it can create some serious blurred vision. Ask me how I know. With the scopolamine patch, I actually felt like I had been drugged. My body just doesn't like medicine. It doesn't like alcohol, so I don't imbibe in any of these things. Thankfully, I don't need to take any medication. But personally, I had a not great reaction to Dramamine, and I had a terrible reaction to scopolamine. So I will never use either of those again. But there are things that you can rely on that are more natural. You can use ginger supplements, or even something as simple as drinking a ginger ale. That's usually what I do. I thankfully don't get seasick very much these days. I did it first when I started cruising, but over time, I think my body acclimated. So when I do on those rare occasions feel some motion sickness, a ginger ale usually does the trick. You can also try acupressure bands. Another thing you can do is try to sail on larger ships, which tend to be more stable, newer ships, which have better stabilizers, or when you're picking a cabin, pick one that is midship and on those lower decks. That can reduce that feeling of motion and your likelihood of having seasickness. So it is a good idea to think ahead of these things. And if you've cruised before and you've had a terrible experience with this, I absolutely get why you hate cruising and you hate being on a boat. But for most people, it is kind of an unfounded concern. Another reason some people don't like cruising is they just hate cruise people. I remember Thanksgiving one year with my sister and her in-laws had just taken a cruise and they had nothing good to say about it. And this was before I started cruising. And I remember asking them, like, what's your beef with cruising? What did you hate about it so much? And she's like, I just hate those cruise people. And at the time, I didn't know what the heck she was talking about. I thought she was just being a curmudgeon, which she kind of is. Sorry. But there are some social dynamics and cultural things with cruising that I can see as a deterrent for some folks. Now, there is a lot of things about cruise culture that is beautiful. I love the camaraderie that is generally shared with cruisers. Cruisers tend to be very open and friendly and very chatty, much to the chagrin of my daughter, who is the most introverted child you'll ever meet. She hates it when people try to talk to her on a cruise, but I'm a social butterfly. I like it. Let's chat it up for days. So those are some of the nice things about cruising, but there are certain kind of behaviors in cruise culture that can be off-putting, and even to me, I find them sometimes annoying. One is that there's this weird dichotomy in cruise culture, and I want to know if you've observed this too. It's like there's no gray area. There's some cruisers who are either super entitled and will expect the world and complain about literally everything. But then there's this other camp on the complete opposite end of the cruise culture spectrum who will jump down the throat of any cruiser who dares express the slightest bit of negative sentiment or criticism, especially if it's against their favorite cruise line. It's like they're not allowed to have any kind of opinion unless it's extremely positive. And I try to see the gray area of, yeah, some cruisers can be entitled. When you go on a cruise, you can't expect the world. Not everything's gonna be perfect. Sometimes they're gonna be understaffed. You're not gonna have this amazing service. Sometimes the food's gonna be crappy. But also, if you have a bad experience, it's okay to talk about it. It doesn't make you necessarily whiny or a Karen or entitled if you have a bad experience necessarily, and you share that. It's about doing it in a non-entitled way. But in cruise culture sometimes, especially in online forums and Facebook groups, this type of toxicity can rear its ugly head. And there have been many times I've seen it, and I see people just getting so nasty in the comments, or I'll post content about a cruise and people will get nasty toward me or start infighting with themselves in the comments. And I'm just like, oh, it's so distasteful. Like, can't we all just get along? We all love cruising. Can we not have an educated discussion about the pros and the cons and the things we like and the things that we don't like, and not be nasty and toxic about it? So I do think that there is sometimes a perception about cruise people being toxic or cruise culture being toxic. And I get that, but I think by and large, cruise culture is way more positive than it is negative. But people that have taken a cruise and they've encountered some of those entitled behaviors or that rudeness, and sometimes people on cruises, why are you so angry? I always say this in my videos. How do you go on a cruise and you're angry all the time? I just don't understand it. So if you go on a cruise and somebody pops off at you and they're rude because they think you cut them in the buffet line. I had somebody jump down my throat once because he thought I cut in line going to the comedy club, and I was actually just going to the bathroom, and he was so rude about it. Like, cruisers, just chill. But if you've taken a cruise and you've encountered these nasty people, just know most cruisers, they're really not like that. Another common complaint that cruise haters have is that feeling of being rushed. Some travelers feel that limited time that you spend in a port of call on a cruise does not allow for authentic or genuine cultural immersion. And I kind of get that. Cruises do provide brief hits of these destinations, and that can feel hurried, especially if you're like me and you're paranoid about getting back to the ship on time, because I never do cruise ship excursions, usually. I almost always go out on my own, and as such, I'm kind of paranoid. I always go back to the ship at least 2 hours before the return to ship time. So if you're at a port of call that already has a short call, and maybe it's early in the morning and you didn't want to get up early, and you might find yourself having only 3 or 4 hours at a destination really, and you can start to really feel rushed. So to address this, or if this is a concern for you, there are itineraries out there that offer overnight stays or long hours in certain ports of call. One of the things I love about Holland America Line is I think they're good about this, especially with some of their European itineraries. In MSC, they often will do overnight calls at their Ocean Key private island, which I think is phenomenal, by the way. And it's so nice to be in a cruise port and on the beach at night, which usually you don't get on a cruise because you have to be back before the sun sets. So there are opportunities for that. You just have to kind of seek it out and make sure that you're researching and planning itineraries and excursions that can give you more of that enriching cultural experience than a lot of those standard group tours that are, let's get off the ship, drink some rum, eat some food, go back on the ship, or get on a bus, go see something and head back. So I think what you make of a cruise, that yeah, you do have a limited time in port, but there is a lot that you can do still, depending on how you structure it. And personally, I do tend to get bored easily. I want to see as much of the world as possible during my days on this earth. So I kind of like those quick hits. I love going to bed and waking up the next morning and being in a different port of call, oftentimes in a different country. And I'm okay going out, exploring, learning some things, a little bit of cultural immersion, and then going back to the comfort of the ship. I find that a benefit of cruising, not a detrimental thing. So why do people love cruising? I do get the hate sometimes, and I get the criticism. Some of it I think is BS, but some of it I do think there's some validity to it. But there are a lot of great things about cruising that draws people like me to it. As I mentioned, I love the opportunity to visit multiple destinations without the hassle of having to book different flights or rent a car, or book car service, or figure out a train schedule like when you're traveling in Europe. I love that you can relax on the ship at night, enjoy good food and entertainment, go to bed, wake up, and you're there. It's pretty amazing. I also love that cruises are mostly all-inclusive. If I travel outside of a cruise, that cost can add up. You've got your meals, your entertainment, your transportation beyond just the flight to get there, your different activities. You have to plan and book reservations and activities. So cruising for me is just so much more easy and relaxing, and it provides really great value for the money. And I also love all the stuff you can do on board. There's pools, there's spas, there's theaters, there's so many diverse dining options. There's classes. Again, I'm a nerd. I love learning things on a cruise ship. And I love those cultural classes and those educational opportunities. So there's a lot of great things about cruising. And while cruise culture can admittedly be toxic, the majority of cruisers are great. And the majority of cruise culture is awesome. And yeah, you might be with thousands of other people, but you're in the same kind of contained petri dish, as some would say, space for sometimes 5, 6, 7 or more days, and you start to see the same people. You start to have that familiarity. You make friends. I have made more friends cruising than I have through traditional land travel, because you have more opportunities to spend time together and to make friends. And that is so awesome, and that's such a unique part of cruising. So I wanna know, what do you think? I suspect most of you watching this video, you're probably like me, you probably love cruising. But if there are things about it you don't like, I would love to know. Drop it down in the comments. And while you're there, also make sure to like and share. And as always, visit my website, profmelissa.com, for free port guides, cruise resources, all my yapping advice, and so much more.